I want you to think about something for a moment. Think about the last time you sat down with an English grammar book. Maybe it was last night, maybe it was this morning. You opened the book, you saw a page full of rules, present perfect continuous, third conditional, phrasal verbs with prepositions, and you told yourself, if I just learn all of this, one day, I will finally be able to speak English. And then, a few hours later, you closed the book and you felt exhausted, not confident, not ready to speak, just tired, and maybe, somewhere deep inside, a little bit hopeless. I want you to know something right now, in the first minute of this video. That feeling is not your fault. You are not slow, you are not bad at languages. You have simply been using a method that was never designed to make you speak. You have been building a house by starting with the roof and wondering why the walls keep falling down. My name is Professor William Parker, and this is the Speaking Mindset. If you are watching this video, I already know a few things about you, even though we have never met. I know that you have studied English for years, maybe 5 years, maybe 10, maybe even longer. I know that you can read an English newspaper and understand most of it. I know that you can probably write a decent email. And I know that when a native speaker sits down in front of you and starts talking at a normal natural speed, something inside you freezes, your mind goes blank. You understand maybe half of the words, and by the time you have translated the first sentence in your head, they have already said 3 more, and you are lost. And when it is your turn to speak, you open your mouth, and instead of words, what comes out is silence, or a nervous laugh, or sorry, can you repeat that, for the 5th time in the conversation. If this sounds familiar, I want you to stay with me for the next hour, because today I am going to tell you something that might feel strange at first, maybe even uncomfortable. I am going to tell you to stop studying grammar, not forever, not completely, but for now. I want you to put the grammar book down, and I want to show you a different path, a path that children walk every single day of their lives, a path that has been proven again and again by science, by linguists, by millions of successful language learners around the world, a path called listening. By the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly why grammar study has been holding you back instead of helping you move forward. You are going to understand how your brain actually acquires language, not how it memorizes facts, but how it truly acquires the ability to use a language naturally. You are going to learn what real listening practice looks like, not just playing English music in the background while you cook dinner, but a specific, powerful kind of listening that rewires your brain for fluency. And I am going to give you a real plan, a plan you can start today, a plan that will slowly but surely turn you from someone who translates English in their head into someone who simply understands it, the way you understand your own native language. So take a breath, get comfortable. Maybe you are listening to this while walking, while driving, while doing the dishes. That is perfect, because that is exactly the kind of listening we are going to talk about. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Grammar Trap. Let me tell you a story. Imagine 2 children are born on the same day in 2 different families. One child grows up in a house where the parents are professional linguists. Every single day, from the moment this child starts talking, the parents correct every mistake. No, you should say I went to the store, not I go to the store yesterday. They explain the past tense. They explain irregular verbs. They give the child grammar lessons at the dinner table. The other child grows up in a normal family. Nobody explains grammar rules. Nobody says, that's the third conditional, sweetheart. The parents simply talk to the child, all day, every day, about the weather, about food, about the family dog, about anything and everything. They read stories out loud, they sing songs, they repeat things. They speak slowly to the baby at first, and faster as the child grows. Now, here is my question for you. Which child do you think will speak more naturally, more fluently, with better intuition for the language by the time they are 5 years old? You already know the answer, because you were that second child. Every single person watching this video, no matter what language you speak natively, learned that language the same way, through thousands and thousands of hours of listening, long before anyone ever taught you a single grammar rule. You did not learn your mother tongue by studying a textbook. You did not sit down at age 2 and memorize the rules of subject-verb agreement. You learned it by listening to your parents, your grandparents, your siblings, the television, the radio, over and over and over again, for years, until the patterns of the language became part of you, as natural as breathing. This is what linguists call natural language acquisition, and it is completely different from what happens in a traditional classroom. In a classroom, you are taught language as if it were mathematics. Here is a formula, here is a rule. Apply the rule to this sentence. Now apply it to another sentence. This method treats language like a puzzle to be solved with logic. But language is not math. Language is a skill, like swimming, like riding a bicycle, like playing the piano. And skills are not learned through explanation. Skills are learned through repetition, through practice, through your body and your brain absorbing patterns until they become automatic. Think about riding a bicycle. Could someone teach you to ride a bicycle by giving you a lecture? Could they explain the physics of balance, the angle of the handlebars, the exact pressure needed on the pedals, and then expect you to get on the bike and ride perfectly? Of course not. You know this. You would fall down. You would wobble. You would need to actually get on the bicycle, again and again, feeling the balance in your body, until one day, without even thinking about it, you could ride smoothly. Nobody thinks about the physics while they are riding a bicycle. The knowledge is not in their conscious mind. It is in their muscles, in their instincts. Speaking a language fluently works exactly the same way. When a native English speaker says, "I've been thinking about it," they are not consciously thinking, "Ah yes, this is the present perfect continuous tense, used to describe an action that started in the past and continues into the present." They are not thinking about grammar at all. The correct grammar simply comes out automatically because their brain has heard that pattern thousands of times before, in thousands of different situations, until it became instinct. This is exactly what you need to develop. Not more rules in your head. Not more knowledge about the language sitting in a folder in your brain labeled grammar facts. You need instinct. You need your brain to hear a sentence and simply know it is correct, without calculating anything. The same way you know your native language is correct, without thinking about the rules behind it. Now, I am not saying grammar is completely useless. Grammar knowledge can help you in specific situations, especially in writing, especially when you need to check your work carefully, especially at a very advanced level when you are polishing your accuracy. But here is the trap that so many English learners fall into, year after year. They believe that grammar study is the main road to fluency. They believe that if they just learn enough rules, speaking will follow naturally. And so they spend hour after hour, year after year, memorizing tables of irregular verbs, doing worksheets, doing multiple choice grammar tests, and they get very, very good at answering grammar questions on paper. But then they meet a real person, and they try to speak, and everything falls apart. Why? Because knowing a rule and using a skill automatically are two completely different things, stored in completely different parts of your brain. The part of your brain that memorizes facts, like grammar rules, dates in history, or mathematical formulas, is different from the part of your brain that controls automatic skills, like speaking, like riding a bicycle, like playing a musical instrument by ear. You can have a brain absolutely full of grammar knowledge and still freeze up completely when you try to have a real conversation, because that knowledge was never converted into instinct. It stayed as facts, and facts are slow. Facts require conscious thinking, searching, calculating. And conversation does not wait for you to calculate, it moves fast, and if you are still busy searching for the right verb form in your mental filing cabinet, the conversation has already moved on without you. This is the grammar trap. It feels productive. It feels like real studying because you get worksheets, you get scores, you get a feeling of academic progress, but it is building the wrong kind of knowledge for the goal you actually want, which is natural, confident speaking. If your goal were to pass a grammar exam on paper, grammar study would be the perfect method. But your goal is not that. Your goal is to open your mouth and have real words come out easily, without fear, without translating first. And for that goal, there is a different, much more powerful road, and that road is listening.
Welcome, compoundant. Chapter 2. How babies learn language and why adults can too.
Let's go deeper into how children acquire language, because understanding this process is the key to understanding everything else in this video. When a baby is born, they cannot speak a single word. They cannot understand a single word either. And yet, by the time that child is 4 or 5 years old, without ever opening a textbook, without ever taking a grammar class, they can speak their native language fluently, with correct grammar, with natural rhythm, with the ability to create sentences they have never heard before. How does this happen? It happens through a process linguists call the silent absorption period, followed by gradual production. In the first year of a baby's life, the baby does not speak at all, beyond crying and simple sounds, but during this time, the baby's brain is not idle. It is working incredibly hard. It is listening, constantly, to everything around it. the voices of the parents, the rhythm of sentences, the rise and fall of questions compared to statements, the specific sounds that exist in this particular language, and the sounds that do not exist. All of this is being absorbed silently, without any pressure to produce anything. Then slowly, around 1 year old, the baby begins to produce single words. Mama, dada, milk, no. These are not random. These are the words the baby has heard the most, the words that carry the most emotional importance. Slowly, these single words become 2-word combinations. Want milk, mama go, then 3-word combinations, and slowly, over years, full sentences with correct grammar begin to emerge. Not because anyone taught grammar rules, but because the child has absorbed the patterns through thousands of hours of exposure, and the brain has naturally extracted the rules on its own, without anyone explaining them consciously. This is remarkable, and I want you to really sit with this idea. No parent on earth sits down with a 2-year-old and says, now we add an S to the verb when the subject is he, she, or it, in the present simple tense. And yet, by around age 4 or 5, almost every child says he wants and she goes correctly, without ever being taught the rule directly. How is this possible? Because the child's brain has been exposed to that pattern so many thousands of times in so many different sentences that the pattern became automatic, absorbed through pure exposure and repetition, not through explicit rule learning. Now here is the question you might be asking. Professor Parker, I am not a baby, I am an adult. Can adults really learn language the same way? This is such an important question, and I want to answer it honestly and clearly. Yes. The answer is yes, with some important nuances that I want to explain carefully because I do not want to oversimplify this for you. It is true that young children have certain biological advantages when it comes to language acquisition. Their brains are more flexible in certain ways, especially for absorbing new sounds and accents without an accent of their own. This is why children who move to a new country often end up speaking the new language with zero foreign accent, while adults who move to the same country often keep some accent even after decades. This is a real biological difference, and I will not pretend it does not exist. However, and this is the crucial point, the core process of language acquisition, the process of absorbing patterns through massive listening exposure and slowly converting that exposure into automatic speaking ability. This process works for adults too. It has been demonstrated again and again by real people around the world. Adults who immerse themselves in massive amounts of listening, who expose their brains to thousands of hours of the target language in context, develop natural fluency and natural instinct for the language, even without ever studying formal grammar. Meanwhile, adults who only study grammar rules and vocabulary lists without massive listening exposure often remain stuck at an intermediate level for years, sometimes for their entire lives, understanding the rules perfectly on paper, but freezing up in real conversation. The famous linguist Stephen Krashen, who has spent decades researching second language acquisition, developed what he calls the input hypothesis. This theory says that we acquire language in only one way, by understanding messages, by receiving what he calls comprehensible input, meaning language that we can mostly understand, even if it is slightly above our current level. According to this theory, conscious grammar study does not directly build our ability to speak fluently. It can help us edit our writing. It can help us monitor our speech in slow, careful situations, but it does not build the deep automatic system that produces fluent speech. Only comprehensible input, received again and again over time, builds that system. This might be the single most important idea in this entire video, so let me say it again in different words. Your brain acquires language through understanding, not through analyzing. When you listen to English and you understand what is being said, even if you do not understand every single word, your brain is quietly, automatically, doing something incredible in the background. It is noticing patterns. It is noticing that certain words tend to come before certain other words. It is noticing that questions have a certain melody and statements have a different melody. It is noticing that when someone talks about yesterday, certain word endings appear, and when someone talks about tomorrow, different words appear. Your conscious mind does not need to analyze any of this. Your brain does it automatically, silently, the same way it did when you were a small child learning your first language. This is wonderful news for you, because it means you do not need a special gift for languages. You do not need to be young. You do not need perfect memory for grammar rules. You need exposure, the right kind of exposure, repeated consistently over time. And that is exactly what we are going to build together in this video. Chapter 3, the silent period, and why it is okay to not speak yet. I want to talk about something that causes enormous anxiety for English learners, something that I believe is actually completely misunderstood, and once you understand it correctly, a huge weight will lift off your shoulders. I am talking about the fear of not being able to speak. So many of my students tell me the same thing. Professor Parker, I understand a lot of English now, when I read it, when I listen carefully, but when I try to speak, nothing comes out. I feel stuck. I feel embarrassed. I feel like something is wrong with me. I want you to know right now that nothing is wrong with you. What you are describing is a completely normal, completely expected stage in language acquisition, and it even has a name. It is called the silent period. Remember the baby we talked about earlier? For the first full year of that baby's life, they did not speak a single real word, and yet their brain was absorbing language at an incredible rate. This silent period was not wasted time, it was essential preparation time. The comprehension had to come first, had to build up to a certain level, before speaking could naturally emerge. If you tried to force that baby to speak full sentences at 6 months old, it simply would not work, no matter how much pressure you applied, because the underlying system was not ready yet. The exact same thing happens with adult language learners, and here is what almost nobody tells you clearly enough. Your ability to understand a language will always develop faster than your ability to produce it. This is not a flaw in you. This is how every single human being on earth acquires language. In every language, in every culture, throughout all of history, comprehension leads, production follows, sometimes weeks later, sometimes months later, depending on how much comprehensible input you have received. So when you feel like you understand more than you can say, that is not a sign of failure. That is a sign that the process is working exactly the way it is supposed to work. Your brain is doing the important, invisible work of building the foundation first. And I know this is hard to hear when you are in a meeting or on a date or talking to a stranger and you desperately want the words to come out right now, immediately, but they don't. I understand that frustration deeply. But please let go of the idea that this frustration means something is broken in you. It simply means your foundation is still being built, and foundations take time. Here is something even more important that I want you to understand. If you push yourself to speak too early, too much, before you have enough input, before your brain has absorbed enough patterns, what often happens is that you speak using translation. You think of a sentence in your native language and you mentally translate it, word by word, into English, using the grammar rules you memorized. This is slow, it is exhausting, and it often produces sentences that are grammatically almost correct, but sound strange, unnatural, not like something a native speaker would actually say. This is because translated sentences follow the logic of your native language, dressed up in English words, rather than following the natural logic of English itself. And the alternative, the path we are focusing on in this video, is to build such a strong foundation of listening comprehension that when you finally do speak, the words come not from translation, but from memory, from pattern recognition, from having heard similar sentences so many times that the correct version simply feels right, the same way it feels right in your native language. This is a completely different mental process, and it produces completely different results. It is slower to develop at first, but the results are permanent, natural, and stress-free once they arrive. So my advice to you, if you are in this frustrating stage right now, where you understand much more than you can say, is this: do not panic, do not think you are failing. Instead, lean deeper into listening. Give your brain more of what it needs, more comprehensible input, more exposure to natural English, and trust that speaking ability will follow, the way it always does, the way it did for every single fluent speaker who ever lived. You cannot rush a foundation, but you can make sure you are building it every single day, and that is exactly what the rest of this video is going to teach you how to do. Chapter 4, Comprehensible Input, the secret ingredient. Now I want to get very specific, because simply saying listen more is not enough advice. I have met English learners who listen to hours of English every single day, for years, and still do not improve very much. Why does this happen? Because not all listening is equal. There is a very specific kind of listening that builds fluency, and there is a kind of listening that, while not harmful, does not help you improve nearly as much as it could. Understanding this difference is going to change how you approach every single listening session from today onward. The magic ingredient is something called comprehensible input, a term coined by Stephen Krashen, and I mentioned it briefly before, but now I want to explain it in real depth, because this is truly the secret ingredient behind natural fluency. Comprehensible input means language content that you can understand the overall meaning of, even if you do not understand every single word. Krashen describes this with a simple formula, I+1, where I represents your current level of understanding, and +1 represents content that is just slightly above that level, challenging enough to push you forward, but not so difficult that you are completely lost. Think about it like weightlifting, if you will allow me this comparison. If you want to build muscle, you do not lift a weight that is far too heavy for you, because you will injure yourself and you will not be able to complete a single repetition. But you also do not lift a weight that is too light, because your muscles will not be challenged enough to grow. The ideal weight is one that challenges you, that requires effort, but that you can still lift with good form, and gradually as you get stronger, you increase the weight. Comprehensible input works exactly the same way for your brain. If you listen to content that is far too difficult, where you understand maybe 10 or 20% of what is being said, your brain cannot extract useful patterns because there is too much unfamiliar noise. You will feel frustrated, exhausted, and you will likely give up. This is a very common mistake. Many learners believe that watching native English movies without any support, at full native speed, discussing complex topics with heavy slang, is the fastest way to improve. But if you are understanding only 15% of it, you are essentially training your brain to tolerate confusion, not to acquire language. On the other hand, if you only listen to content that is far too easy, content you already understand completely, 100%, with no new words, no new structures, your brain has nothing new to absorb. You are simply reviewing what you already know, which has some value for reinforcement, but very little value for growth. The sweet spot, the comprehensible input zone, is content where you understand somewhere between 70 and 90% of what is being said. This means you understand the general meaning easily, you can follow the story or the conversation without feeling lost. But there are still new words, new expressions, new grammar patterns appearing regularly, patterns that your brain can notice and absorb because they appear in a context you already understand. This is exactly why listening to graded readers, simplified podcasts for learners, and slightly simplified content is often far more valuable, especially in the earlier and middle stages of learning, than diving straight into native-level content with no support. It is not because native content is bad. It is because native content is often far above the comprehensible input zone for learners who are still building their foundation. How do you find your own personal comprehensible input zone? Here is a simple, practical test. Play a piece of English audio or video content. As you listen, ask yourself honestly, am I following the overall meaning without constant effort? If the answer is yes, and you feel like you understand what is happening, even with some gaps, that content is likely in your comprehensible input zone. If you feel completely lost, if every sentence feels like a wall of unfamiliar sound, that content is currently too difficult for you, and you should look for something slightly easier. If you feel bored, like you already know everything being said and nothing feels new, that content is too easy, and it is time to move up slightly. I want to give you an important piece of encouragement here. There is absolutely no shame in choosing content that feels too easy for your self-image. So many of my students tell me, Professor Parker, but that content is for beginners, and I am intermediate, I should not be listening to that. This kind of thinking is exactly what slows people down. Your ego does not build fluency. Comprehensible input builds fluency. If content in the 70 to 90% understanding zone happens to be labeled as beginner or elementary content, that is completely fine. Use it. Your brain does not care about labels. It only cares about receiving input it can process and learn from. As you consume more of it, your comprehension will rise, and naturally, over time, you will move on to more advanced content, because the easier content will start to feel too easy, and you will be ready, without any forcing, to move upward. This is the natural organic path of comprehensible input-based learning. You are not forcing yourself through content that is too hard, gritting your teeth, feeling miserable, and giving up after 2 weeks. You are consistently feeding your brain the right kind of input at the right level and allowing your comprehension to rise naturally, step by step, the same way a plant grows when it receives the right amount of water and sunlight. Not too much, not too little, just the right amount, consistently, over time. Chapter 5. Active listening versus passive listening. Now let's talk about a distinction that is absolutely essential if you want to get the most out of every minute you spend listening to English. Many people believe that simply having English audio playing somewhere near them in the background while they do other tasks is the same as real listening practice. I want to be honest with you about this because I think you deserve the truth rather than an easy answer that feels nice but does not actually work. There are two very different kinds of listening, and they produce very different results. The first kind is passive listening, sometimes called background listening. This is when you have English content playing, perhaps a podcast, perhaps music, perhaps a television show, while your main attention is somewhere else entirely, cooking, cleaning, working on something unrelated, scrolling through your phone. Your ears are technically receiving the sound waves, but your conscious attention is not actually processing the meaning of what is being said. The second kind is active listening, sometimes called focused or intentional listening. This is when you are giving your full attention to the audio content, actively trying to understand the meaning, noticing new words, noticing how sentences are constructed, engaging your brain fully with what you are hearing. Here is the honest truth. Passive listening does have some small value, particularly for training your ear to recognize the general sounds, rhythm, and music of the English language, especially in the very early stages of learning, and especially for maintaining a feeling of connection to the language throughout your day. If you already have a strong foundation, listening passively to content you mostly understand can help reinforce what you already know, almost like gentle background reinforcement. But passive listening alone, without any active listening, will not build the deep comprehension and pattern recognition needed for real fluency. Your brain, when it is not paying focused attention, does not do the deep work of extracting patterns and building automatic language instinct nearly as effectively as it does when you are truly engaged and focused. This is why I want to encourage you, especially in the beginning of your listening journey, to prioritize active listening sessions, even if they are shorter than your passive listening time. 15 to 30 minutes of truly focused, active listening every day will do more for your fluency than 3 hours of English playing quietly in the background while your mind is elsewhere. So what does active listening actually look like in practice? Let me walk you through it. First, choose content in your comprehensible input zone, the 70 to 90% understanding level we discussed in the previous chapter. Second, remove distractions, put your phone somewhere else, close other tabs. Give this time your genuine attention, the same way you would if you were in a classroom listening to an important lesson. Third, listen with the intention of understanding meaning first, not translating word by word. This is crucial. If you try to translate every single word into your native language as you hear it, you will always be 1 or 2 sentences behind, and you will miss the natural flow and rhythm of the language. Instead, try to grasp the overall picture, the overall story, the overall feeling of what is being communicated, the same way you understand a conversation in your native language, by feeling the meaning as a whole, not by mentally translating piece by piece. Fourth, it is perfectly fine, and actually very valuable, to listen to the same piece of content multiple times. The first time, you might understand 70%. The second time, because you already have context and you already know roughly what happens, your brain is free to notice more details and your understanding might rise to 80%. The third time, you might notice specific phrases, specific word choices, specific patterns of grammar that you missed before because you are no longer struggling to follow the general story. This technique of repeated listening to the same content is one of the most powerful and underused tools in language learning. Many learners feel they must always consume new content, new videos, new podcasts, but repetition with familiar content, listened to multiple times, builds much deeper absorption than constantly moving to new material you have never heard before. Fifth, after listening, take just a few minutes to reflect. What was this about? What new words or expressions did you notice? You do not need to write an essay. Even 30 seconds of mental reflection, asking yourself, what did I just learn, helps to cement the input into your long-term memory. I want to be clear that passive listening still has its place in your life. Play English podcasts while you cook. Play English content while you drive, if it is safe to do so and does not distract you dangerously. This helps maintain your connection to the language, keeps your ear tuned to its rhythm, and there is nothing wrong with it. But please, do not let passive listening be the only kind of listening you do. Build in dedicated, focused, active listening time every single day, even if it is just 20 minutes, because this is where the real transformation happens. Chapter 6. Building your daily listening habit. Knowledge without action changes nothing. You could watch this entire video, nod your head, agree with everything I say, and then close YouTube and go back to exactly the same grammar-focused habits you had before, and nothing in your English will change. So now, I want to help you actually build a real, sustainable, daily listening habit, one that fits into your real life, not some idealized version of your life, where you have 3 free hours every day, because most of us do not have that luxury. The first principle of building any lasting habit is consistency over intensity. It is far more valuable to listen actively for 20 minutes every single day than to listen for 4 hours on Sunday and then do nothing for the rest of the week. Your brain builds language patterns through repeated, spaced exposure over time. A burst of 4 hours once a week does not give your brain the same opportunity to reinforce patterns as 20 minutes daily does, because the days in between allow forgetting to creep in, while daily practice constantly refreshes and strengthens what you have already been exposed to. So my first practical recommendation is this: choose a specific, realistic amount of time you can commit to every single day, even on your busiest days. It does not need to be large. 15 minutes is enough to start. 20 minutes is wonderful. 30 minutes is excellent if you can manage it. The key is that this amount must be small enough that you will actually do it every day, even when you are tired, even when you are busy, even when you do not feel motivated. A small habit performed consistently for a year will produce far greater results than an ambitious habit that you abandon after 2 weeks because it demanded too much from your daily schedule. Second, attach your listening habit to an existing habit you already do every day. This is a well-known principle from habit formation research. If you already brush your teeth every morning, perhaps you listen to English for 5 minutes while doing that, and then continue for 10 more minutes right after. If you already commute to work or school, that commute time becomes your listening time. If you already cook dinner every evening, that becomes another opportunity. By attaching your new listening habit to something you already do automatically, without needing willpower or motivation, you dramatically increase the chances that this habit will stick permanently, rather than fading away after the initial excitement wears off, which is exactly what happens to most New Year's resolutions and most ambitious study plans. Third, prepare your content in advance. One of the biggest reasons people fail to maintain a listening habit is decision fatigue. Every day, they open their phone, they do not know what to listen to, they spend 10 minutes scrolling through options, feeling overwhelmed, and eventually they give up and do something else instead. To avoid this, spend just a little bit of time once a week, perhaps on a Sunday evening, choosing several pieces of content for the upcoming week. Download a few episodes of an English podcast at your comprehensible input level. Save a few videos to watch later. This way, when the moment arrives to listen, there is no friction, no decision to make. You simply press play on something you already chose in advance. Fourth, track your progress, even in a very simple way. This does not need to be complicated. A simple check mark on a calendar for every day you complete your listening session can be surprisingly motivating. Human beings love to see a chain of success building up day after day, and most of us feel a strong resistance to breaking that chain once it has grown. Do not underestimate the psychological power of simply seeing 7 check marks in a row, then 14, then 30. Fifth, and this is very important, forgive yourself immediately if you miss a day. Life happens, you will get sick, you will have an emergency, you will forget sometimes, especially at the beginning. The difference between people who succeed with a new habit and people who quit is not that successful people never miss a day. It is that successful people, when they miss a day, simply continue the very next day without turning it into a reason to quit entirely. One missed day is nothing. Give yourself full permission to miss occasionally and simply return to the habit immediately afterward, without guilt, without drama, without deciding that the whole plan has failed just because of one imperfect day. Now, let me talk about how to gradually increase the difficulty and volume of your listening over time, because your habit should not stay exactly the same forever. In the first month, focus purely on consistency, with shorter, easier content, well within your comprehensible input zone, even if it feels almost too easy at times. Your goal in month 1 is simply to build the daily habit itself, not to make dramatic leaps in difficulty. In the second and third months, as the daily habit becomes automatic, something you do without even thinking about it, begin gradually increasing both the duration of your sessions and the difficulty of the content. Perhaps you move from 15 minutes to 25 minutes. Perhaps the podcasts you were listening to, which once felt challenging, now feel comfortable, and it is time to find slightly more advanced content with a bit more natural speed, a bit more natural vocabulary, a bit less simplification for learners. By months 4 through 6, if you have maintained your daily practice, you will very likely notice something remarkable happening. Content that once felt impossible, native speed conversations, native movies without simplification, will start to feel more accessible. Not perfectly clear, not 100% understood, but no longer like an impenetrable wall of sound. This is the natural gradual progression of comprehensible input-based learning, and it happens through consistent daily exposure, not through occasional heroic study sessions followed by long periods of nothing. I also want to mention variety, because variety keeps your listening habit enjoyable rather than tedious, and enjoyment is deeply connected to long-term consistency. Mix different types of content throughout your week. Some days listen to a podcast discussing a topic you find personally interesting. Cooking, sports, business, whatever genuinely captures your curiosity. Other days, watch a short video with clear speech and visual context that helps you understand meaning, even when some words are unfamiliar. Other days, listen to simple audio stories which combine the comprehension benefits of listening with the narrative pull of a good story, keeping you engaged and wanting to know what happens next. When you genuinely enjoy the content you are consuming, the entire process stops feeling like difficult, effortful studying and starts feeling like something you actually look forward to each day. This shift from obligation to genuine enjoyment is one of the most powerful accelerants of long-term language learning success that I have witnessed throughout my years of teaching. Chapter 7, From Listening to Speaking, The Natural Bridge. At this point, you might be wondering something very reasonable. Professor Parker, I understand why listening builds comprehension, but this channel is called The Speaking Mindset. I need to actually speak English. How does listening turn into speaking? This is a wonderful question, and I want to walk you through exactly how this bridge works, because understanding this connection will help you trust the process, even during moments when speaking still feels difficult. Think back to the child we discussed earlier. That child listened for a full year before producing even a single word, and then continued listening far more than speaking for several more years after that, even as their speaking ability grew. And yet, eventually, full, fluent, grammatically correct speech emerged, seemingly on its own. How did this transformation happen? It happened because of a concept I want to introduce now, called output priming, or sometimes called the reservoir effect. Imagine your brain as a reservoir, a large container that holds water. Every time you listen actively to comprehensible English, you are pouring water into that reservoir. At first, when the reservoir is nearly empty, you can pour in quite a lot of water, and nothing seems to happen, because the reservoir is so large and so empty that the water level barely rises. This is exactly how it feels in the early stages of listening-based learning. You listen, and it feels like nothing is happening, like you are not improving at all, like your speaking ability has not changed one bit. But you are not wasting your time, you are simply filling a large reservoir that has not yet reached the point where it overflows. And here is the beautiful thing about reservoirs. Once they reach a certain level, once enough water has been poured in over enough time, the water begins to overflow naturally, without you forcing anything. This is exactly what happens with speaking ability. Once you have absorbed enough patterns, enough vocabulary and context, enough natural rhythms and structures through listening, speaking begins to emerge, often surprising the learner themselves, who suddenly finds a sentence coming out of their mouth correctly, naturally, without any conscious translation, a sentence they never specifically studied or memorized, but simply absorbed through repeated exposure. This is why so many people who focus heavily on listening report a similar experience. They say, I don't know how, but suddenly I could just say that. They are not exaggerating, and they are not being modest about hidden effort. This truly is how comprehensible input-based fluency develops. It builds up silently, invisibly, for what can feel like a frustratingly long time, and then it begins expressing itself in speech, sometimes gradually, sometimes in what feels like sudden leaps forward. However, and I want to be very honest and practical with you here, listening alone, while it builds the essential foundation, works even better when it is eventually combined with actual speaking practice, once your comprehension reservoir has reached a reasonable level. Listening builds the raw material, the patterns, the vocabulary, the instinct for what sounds correct. But speaking itself is also a physical skill involving your mouth, your tongue, your breathing, your ability to retrieve words quickly under the time pressure of a real conversation. This physical, retrieval-based skill benefits from actual practice once you have enough input built up to draw from. So here is my honest, practical recommendation for combining listening and speaking in a way that respects the natural order of acquisition. In your first few months of committed daily listening, do not worry excessively about speaking. Let your reservoir fill, trust the process. If speaking opportunities arise naturally, in conversation with friends, in language exchange, take them, but without pressure, without judging yourself harshly for hesitation or mistakes, because you are still in the building phase. As your listening comprehension grows stronger, and you begin to notice that understanding feels easier, more automatic, less effortful, this is the natural signal that your reservoir is reaching a healthy level, and this is the time to gradually increase your speaking practice as well. Try speaking exercises where you repeat sentences you have heard out loud using the exact rhythm and pronunciation of the original speaker. This technique, called shadowing, is incredibly powerful because it combines listening input with physical speaking practice simultaneously, training your mouth to produce the sounds and rhythms your brain has already absorbed through listening. Try finding conversation partners, whether through language exchange applications, online communities, or in-person meetups, and have real conversations, even simple ones, even short ones. Do not be afraid of making mistakes during these conversations. Mistakes are not failures. Mistakes are simply data, showing you exactly where your reservoir still needs more filling, exactly which patterns you have not yet fully absorbed. Every single fluent speaker of every single language on earth made countless mistakes on their journey to fluency. There has never been a single exception to this in the entire history of human language learning. I want you to remember this key insight from this entire chapter. Speaking is not something you force into existence through pure willpower and grammar memorization. Speaking is something that emerges naturally from a sufficiently full reservoir of comprehensible input, supported and refined by actual speaking practice. Once that reservoir has reached a healthy level, trust the listening, trust the process. The words will come exactly the way they came for every child, in every language, throughout all of human history. Chapter 8. Common mistakes people make with this method. I have taught this approach to thousands of students over the years, and I have noticed the same handful of mistakes appearing again and again. I want to walk you through these common pitfalls now, so that you can avoid them from the very beginning, rather than discovering them the hard way after months of frustration. The first common mistake is choosing content that is far too difficult, out of impatience or a desire to appear advanced. I mentioned this earlier, but it deserves repeating, because it is perhaps the single most common reason people abandon listening-based learning. They watch an advanced native movie filled with slang, cultural references, and extremely fast speech, understand almost nothing, feel completely defeated, and conclude that this whole method does not work for them. The method is not the problem. The content level was simply wrong for their current stage. Please swallow your pride, choose content genuinely within your comprehensible input zone, even if it feels embarrassingly simple, and trust that you will naturally progress to more difficult content as your comprehension grows. The second common mistake is translating constantly in your head while listening, rather than trying to feel the meaning directly. This habit is deeply ingrained for many learners, especially those who studied primarily through grammar translation methods in school for many years. Breaking this habit takes conscious effort and practice. When you notice yourself translating word by word, gently redirect your attention toward the overall meaning, the overall picture, the overall feeling of the sentence, rather than each individual word in isolation. This will feel strange and difficult at first, especially if translation has been your only strategy for years. But with consistent practice, direct comprehension without translation becomes increasingly natural. The third common mistake is inconsistency, treating listening practice as something you do only when you feel motivated or have extra free time, rather than as a non-negotiable daily habit. As we discussed in Chapter 6, consistency is far more important than occasional intensity. If you find yourself listening intensely for a week and then not at all for the following 3 weeks, you are not giving your brain the steady, repeated exposure it needs to build lasting patterns. Please revisit Chapter 6 and commit to a realistic, sustainable daily practice rather than an unsustainable burst of enthusiasm followed by abandonment. The fourth common mistake is expecting rapid, dramatic results within a few weeks and giving up when those results do not appear. Remember the reservoir metaphor from Chapter 7. In the early stages, the water level rises so slowly that it feels like nothing is happening at all. This is completely normal, and it does not mean the method is failing. Many learners quit at exactly this point, right before the reservoir would have begun to visibly overflow. simply because they could not tolerate the apparent lack of progress during the early filling stage. Please be patient with yourself. Meaningful language acquisition through comprehensible input typically takes months to show clearly visible results in speaking, and this is true no matter which method someone uses, listening-based or otherwise. There is no shortcut that bypasses the fundamental need for sufficient time and exposure. The fifth common mistake is passive listening exclusively without ever engaging in active, focused listening sessions. As we discussed in Chapter 5, background listening has some value, but it cannot fully replace the deeper, more effective learning that happens during focused, active listening sessions. If your only English exposure is background podcasts while you do other tasks and you never sit down with genuine, undivided attention, your progress will be significantly slower than it could be. Please make room, even just 15 or 20 minutes daily, for truly focused listening practice. The sixth common mistake is completely abandoning all other forms of English study or exposure, believing that listening alone is the only thing that matters. While listening deserves to be the primary foundation of your learning, especially in the way we have discussed throughout this video, a well-rounded approach that eventually includes some reading, some vocabulary review, and eventually some speaking practice will accelerate your overall progress even further. I am not asking you to abandon everything except listening forever. I am asking you to fundamentally shift your priorities, placing listening at the center of your practice rather than grammar memorization, while still allowing other elements to support this central foundation as you progress. The seventh common mistake is comparing your progress to other people's progress, particularly people you see online who claim to have achieved fluency in unrealistically short timeframes. Every learner's journey is different, influenced by their starting level, the amount of time they can realistically dedicate, their exposure to related languages, and countless other individual factors. Comparing your own reservoir, at whatever level it currently sits, to someone else's reservoir, which may have been filling for years longer than yours, or under very different circumstances, serves no useful purpose, and often leads to unnecessary discouragement. Focus entirely on your own consistent daily practice and trust that your own reservoir is filling at exactly the pace that reflects your own genuine, sustained effort. If you can recognize these 7 mistakes in your own habits and gently correct them, you will find that your progress through comprehensible input-based listening accelerates significantly, and the entire process becomes far more enjoyable and far less frustrating than it might otherwise be. Chapter 9. Choosing the right content for your level and interests. Let's get very practical now, because I want you to leave this video not just understanding the theory, but knowing exactly what kinds of content to look for based on your current level, so that you can begin building your comprehensible input practice immediately, starting today. If you consider yourself a beginner to lower intermediate learner, someone who still struggles quite a bit with everyday conversations, I recommend starting with content specifically designed for language learners, spoken more slowly and clearly than natural native speech, using simpler vocabulary and shorter sentences, but still discussing real, interesting topics rather than artificial textbook dialogues. Look for podcasts and channels specifically created for English learners at the beginner and elementary levels. These often feature a host who speaks deliberately slower, explains new vocabulary naturally within the flow of speech rather than stopping for grammar explanations, and covers genuinely interesting topics, stories, and conversations. Simple audio stories written and narrated for language learners are also excellent at this stage because the combination of narrative structure, natural curiosity about what happens next, and manageable vocabulary creates an ideal comprehensible input environment. If you consider yourself an intermediate learner, someone who can follow simplified content quite comfortably and is ready for a bit more challenge, I recommend gradually introducing content created for native speakers, but choosing formats that naturally support comprehension. Look for video content where visual context helps you understand meaning, even when specific words are unfamiliar, cooking videos where you can see what is being prepared, tutorial videos where you can see what is being demonstrated, and vlogs where the visual setting provides strong contextual clues. Podcasts and interviews on topics you already have background knowledge about are also excellent at this stage because your existing knowledge of the subject matter fills in comprehension gaps even when certain vocabulary is unfamiliar. If you already understand the general topic of business, or science, or a hobby you personally practice, listening to native speakers discuss that same topic in English becomes significantly more comprehensible because you are not fighting both unfamiliar content and unfamiliar language simultaneously. If you consider yourself an upper intermediate to advanced learner, someone who can generally follow native content but still misses certain details, certain fast speech, certain cultural references or idioms, I recommend diving more fully into authentic native content across a wide variety of formats, native podcasts on topics that genuinely interest you, native television shows and films, ideally without subtitles in your native language. Those subtitles in English itself can still be helpful support at this stage. Audiobooks combined with reading along in the physical or digital text, which creates a particularly powerful combination of input and natural conversations between native speakers, such as panel discussions, interviews, and casual conversation podcasts, which expose you to the natural rhythm, interruptions, and informal patterns of real spoken English that scripted or simplified content often lacks. Regardless of your current level, I want to emphasize one final, crucial principle when choosing content, and that is genuine personal interest. The comprehensible input hypothesis becomes significantly more powerful when combined with genuine engagement and curiosity about the content itself. If you find cooking fascinating, choose cooking content. If you love true crime stories, look for true crime podcasts appropriate to your level. If you are passionate about football or fashion or technology or history, seek out content specifically about those topics. When you are genuinely curious about what happens next, genuinely interested in the information being shared, your brain naturally pays closer attention, retains information more effectively, and experiences the entire process as enjoyable rather than as a chore you are forcing yourself through out of obligation. This single factor, genuine interest, can be the difference between a listening habit that lasts for years and steadily builds fluency and a listening habit that feels like medicine, technically good for you, but abandoned within a few weeks because it never became something you actually looked forward to each day. Chapter 10, The Fear of Speaking and How Listening Quietly Dissolves It. Before we move to your final action plan, I want to spend some time on something that I believe is just as important as the technical method itself, and that is the emotional side of learning English. Because I have met students who understood every single thing I have told you so far, who intellectually agreed with all of it, and who still struggled to speak, not because their reservoir was empty, but because fear was standing directly in front of the door, blocking the words from coming out even when they were ready. Let's be honest with each other for a moment. Why does speaking English in front of another person feel so frightening for so many learners? It is rarely about the grammar itself. It is almost always about the fear of being judged, the fear of sounding foolish, the fear that a mistake will somehow reveal something embarrassing about you as a person, rather than simply revealing that you are, quite reasonably, still learning a second language. This fear is completely understandable, and I do not want to dismiss it or tell you to simply not be afraid, because that kind of advice has never actually helped anyone stop feeling afraid. Instead, I want to show you why the listening-based approach we have been discussing throughout this video does something remarkable for this fear, almost as a side effect, without you even trying to work on your confidence directly. When you spend months building your comprehension through massive listening exposure, something quiet and powerful happens beneath the surface. You begin to develop what I call a felt sense of the language, an intuitive, physical familiarity with how English actually sounds, how sentences actually flow, what actually sounds natural and what does not. This felt sense is very different from a list of memorized rules sitting in your conscious mind, ready to be second-guessed under pressure. When your confidence is built purely on memorized grammar rules, every time you open your mouth, a small, anxious part of your brain is frantically checking those rules against what you are about to say. And this checking process is itself a major source of anxiety, because it happens under time pressure, in real time, in front of another human being who is waiting for you to finish your sentence. But when your confidence is built on a deep, absorbed, felt sense of the language, developed through hundreds of hours of comprehensible listening, there is no frantic checking process happening. The correct pattern simply arrives, the same way it arrives when you speak your native language, without conscious searching, and this absence of frantic internal searching is itself deeply calming, even if you are not consciously aware of why you suddenly feel calmer. I have watched this transformation happen in student after student. In the early months of committing to daily listening practice, many of my students report feeling exactly the same nervousness about speaking that they felt before starting this method, sometimes even a little more nervousness, because they are now more aware of how much English they still do not fully understand. This is completely normal, and I want you to expect it, so that it does not discourage you if it happens to you as well. But somewhere around the 4th, 5th, or 6th month of consistent daily listening, something begins to shift. Students describe it in different ways. Some say, I don't feel like I'm searching for words anymore, they just kind of appear. Others say, I still make mistakes, but somehow the mistakes don't feel as scary as they used to. Others simply say, I don't know what changed, but talking feels easier now. What changed is that the reservoir reached a level where the felt sense of the language became strong enough to reduce the conscious, anxious effort involved in speaking. The fear did not disappear because they did a specific confidence exercise, or because they told themselves positive affirmations in the mirror every morning, though there is nothing wrong with those practices if they help you. The fear reduced because the underlying skill itself became more automatic,